The next myth is if you relapse, you failed.
I don't like that one. No, you're definitely, in my opinion, you're definitely not a failure. As the failing is if you stay drinking or stay using. If you fall off or I fall off any time now and then stop again and get back into meetings and own up to, I'm after doing this and this. This has happened. This is why it happened. This is how it happened. And own all of the feelings that come with it. I've seen it and it's remarkable. It takes huge strength from someone to redirect back on course again. And I've heard it said, it's like if you're on a bus journey and you stop somewhere mid-journey and get off, you can get back on that bus again and continue on that journey again. But you're not back at the start. You're not some kind of failure. And everything you've done to that point is still counts. It all counts. If I was been asked, that's what I'd say. You're absolutely not a failure. As long as you 100%. Get back on the wagon.
And I think as well, everyone has their own journey. And I got clean started last year. But I was just clean. I wasn't in recovery. And it took my relapse for me to understand the difference between being clean and being in recovery and having that support and building those connections and getting those resources and meetings. We always talk about meetings, but I mean, that's how you get into recovery. And so relapse is just part of my story. It's part of many people's stories. Not a lot of people get it the first time. And I think the shame and the guilt that can be put around relapsing and the fear of relapse, we talked about it before, the fear of relapse can almost be a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're continuously thinking about substances, about not relapsing. So then you relapse. And I think it can be really hard. I think it's really hard for families to understand it.
These analogies have been in a boat and a lifeboat and this kind of boat and that kind of boat. And I felt like my boat was a fucking sieve. And there was holes everywhere in this fucking boat. And every time I'm like patching up all of these holes, like there it is, there it is. But it was still leaking and I was still sinking. And I kind of, with each new lesson, it was like, okay, well now I know that's definitely something that I'm not doing anymore. There's others still leaking in. So it is a very slow, like you have to identify all of these areas where the fucking water's getting in and I'm drowning, you know?
Yeah.
And sure, I went a year before I even asked for help, thinking I could do it myself. I could technically count every one of those 3 days and 5 days and 3 days again. Every one of those was technically a slip or a relapse because I'm finished. I'm not doing it anymore. And then I'm like, I'll just do one more because it's fine. And then I'm like, no, I'm not doing it anymore. And that was with myself, just trying to figure out what's going on. Can I do this? But once I grabbed a hold of the meetings and started doing that, it was like I had to actually let go that I can't do this on my own. I do need this support. I can do this. But I needed that bit to get that bit of hope. And I am afraid of relapse. I really am, because I'm afraid of whether I would actually come back, even though I know and I've seen others do it and I know it's the right thing to do. Would I? I don't know.
As well, I think there's healthy fear and then there is fear that consumes you, right, and affects how you're living. And I think a healthy fear of relapse is good, and it's good to be vigilant. You know, I think the second time, because I had that relapse, I really could clearly see and understand what my process of relapse is. And in general, you know, a lot of the academics and doctors and fellowships and everything, they'll talk about the relapse. Before you pick up, you actually relapse. There's an emotional relapse first, then a mental relapse, and then you pick up. And that emotional and mental relapse can be happening for months, you know. For me, it showed up as I stopped trying. I stopped attending meetings. I stopped thinking about recovery and focusing on recovery, and I stopped self-care. And it just was a slippery slope, and I can see it so clearly how it happened and then, you know, you have the mental relapses where you start planning and you start thinking, oh yeah, no, this would be a good idea if I used instead, and it just comes back. And I could see that happening. And now I can feel it. If I'm becoming complacent, I can identify those things really clearly. And so I'm hoping I'll never relapse again, because it doesn't just happen overnight. And I think maybe for families, how could you help them realize this? You know, if there was a family of someone listening in today, what would help them see that relapse it's an awful thing, but it actually damages and hurts the addict far more than it hurts anybody else. And yes, it does hurt the family members. Absolutely, it does hurt the family members, because they do care very deeply and they see that the person is doing really well. But I suppose that's why it's described as being like a disease, because it doesn't just go away, and it isn't just because it looks well on the outside. It
doesn't mean that something isn't boiling up inside.
Yeah, that's another one of our myths, like, for sure. But yeah, with the family, I think it's just how families react. I have a very supportive, very loving family that understand addiction, I think, as well as almost someone who isn't an addict can understand it. And what that meant for me is that when I did relapse, within 3 weeks, I was able to go to my family and say I've relapsed. And I think if family members are, I don't know how to say this and keep it sensitive, like, but because my family were understanding and they always came to me with love and compassion and understanding, I knew I could go to them. But if their thoughts around addiction were just shame, anger, how could you do this? I don't know if I would have been able to go to them. And if I couldn't go to them, I probably would have continued relapsing, you know? So their understanding saved my life. It gave me a safe space to be able to open up and to be able to bring it to them. And luckily I nipped that in the bud in 3 weeks. Not nipped it in the bud, that sounds so casual. It was a tough journey, you know, and I kept relapsing as well. But I just mean I made it back, and people don't always make it back. And the longer it goes, the harder it is to get back up on the horse, the more you lose what you'd built.
Understanding that the addiction has you. It's not like that you have the addiction. The addiction has you. And it's really like a whole other personality for me. It was like I had a load of different personalities. And this particular addicted one was trying to kill me.
I think they say, I've heard many, many times, addiction is not a moral failing. It is an illness. It's a disease. It's a sickness. And just as we wouldn't, you know, if someone broke their leg, we wouldn't say you're a weak person. You have no willpower. You're a bad person. You should feel shame for breaking your leg. I mean, unless they did something crazy, you know, like jumped out a window, like tried to fly or something, you know. But yeah, like that. It's to say it's not a moral failing. It doesn't mean you're a bad person.
It's not. It is a sickness or a disease, but it's like a sickness. It's mentally and physically and spiritually a sickness. It gets all of you, like a bone disease is in your bones. This is in your bones and your skin and your hair and your nails and your teeth and your eyeballs. It's every part of you. It's in your soul, and it has you, and you have to fight for your own life against it first.
It's a disease of the body, mind, and spirit. It's physical, mental, and spiritual. And so physically you have compulsion. So the desire is the obsession to use, thinking about all the time. The body is the compulsion, where you literally, once you pick up and feed that obsession, you're not you anymore. Your compulsion is gone. Once you have one drink, you're not going to be able to stop. And then the spiritual part, that's how you get out of it, is science and psychologists and doctors. They're great. And they'll tackle the physical and they'll tackle the mental. But you have to tackle the spiritual. And I think meetings are the spiritual, connecting with other addicts, hearing wisdom, feeling love, compassion.
It really is. Because I was dead inside. Spiritually, I was dead. It was like a shell. The other thing I was kind of ashamed of. And like, how do I fix it? Where do I go? What do I do? Oh, it's easier to just drink. I'll deal with it tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know?
That hole in your soul that you're just trying to fill. That void, emptiness. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual void.
That sort of goes on to the other one as well, that there's a difference between addictions, because there isn't. Like if it's alcohol, I mean, at one point I was addicted to hash and marijuana, weed, which a lot of people still argue that that's not even addictive. That's just a plant. That's just blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay then. Let me see you go a couple of days without any and see how not addicted you are to it, sweetheart. I couldn't function. I couldn't go anywhere in the day without smoking joint first, have to smoke joint. And when it came to going anywhere or doing anything with anyone, do these smoke as well? Can I get my smoke in? Will I have a smoke beforehand? Will I have a smoke afterwards? It took over everything.
Yeah, that's the obsession. And you just, all that bad stuff, you're like moving into insanity, and you're just further pushing your spirit down. And what recovery does is it gives you connection, it gives you love, it gives you gratitude, it gives you peace. And that your spirit starts to flourish again. And that's why you start having purpose again and meaning. And it's why you have motivation. And it's why a lot of mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, those sort of things can often start not leaving, because you learn how to move through them. But your spirit starts to flourish again. Yeah. And I think
even when you said that, I can see your spirit is flourishing, Miriam. I love it. I love
recovery.
I love recovery too. I really do. And I'm really going to cry, because this is so real and it's so true.
Yeah, it's life or death. It's
so
literally life or
true.
death. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I say
And I
life, I
choose
don't
life.
just mean